welcome back to the Jack Threlfall Show. Welcome to this week's interview segment. We've joined by a very, very special guest this week, Mr. Jamey Price, professional motorsport photographer, photojournalist, traveled all around the world. So hopefully should be a really great interview today. Welcome to the show, Jamey.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.
I think the best place to start would just be for you to explain a little bit about what your job is at the moment. We'll cover kind of how you got there later on in the interview, but just if you could explain what a work weekend looks like for you at a racetrack.
My job, I have the best job on earth most days anyway, but my job is basically to document car racing, motorcycle racing, whatever it is that I've been asked to go to and experience it on behalf of the people that can't be there in person. So I'm working for teams, I'm working for manufacturers, drivers, sponsors, sometimes the series itself, just telling the whole story from start to finish, the beginning of the weekend, not just cars on the racetrack, but the people working on cars and just everything. It's kind of like I've used this analogy a lot recently, but it's kind of like being a wedding photographer, but with race cars. So you're really just trying to cover the broad spectrum of what it's like to be at the races that weekend. And I'm very fortunate that I get to go all over the world, so many different countries. You know, car racing is an amazing thing that it's pretty much run on every continent except for Antarctica at this point. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
really
one
of the things you had mentioned is that it seems almost unique to racing that they encourage photography and they let all the fans up close at a racetrack. It's a sort of special feature we've got of being racing fans, that level of access. The access that you have is incredible, but also just the fans get to kind of share in that, being up right close to the racetrack. How do you feel that that level of access enables you to kind of better tell the story?
Well, that's how I and most of my colleagues got our start, is just by going to the races as a fan with a camera. And we are so fortunate that for whatever reason, just the mentality in car racing is that they want the fans to be able to take that home. They want the fans to be able to share that. You know, I can kind of see from the other sports that don't allow that perspective. Like you can't allow, 15-20,000 people into Champions League, like, stadium with 500-600 millimeter lenses. There's just not that much room. And you'd have people like banging into each other with lenses and gear, and it just creates a safety concern. But with racetracks, because they're so big, I guess it's just one of the reasons that they do encourage fans to just bring their cameras and you can go. There's very few tracks or series that don't allow fan photography. And so it's so much fun to walk around the races and talk to people that have cameras that just want to be there doing what I'm doing, or don't even want to do it professionally. They're just enjoying it as a fan. And some of the races that I've been to, you see equipment that is, newer and more expensive than my own. And,
Yeah.
like when I've gone to Asia before, you see cameras that aren't even on the market yet, just being held by fans. And it's super, super cool. It's a lot of fun to see that. So we're very fortunate that in car racing, they encourage that versus, golf or football or American football, tennis, basketball, like all these sports. You can't walk into an arena with a camera and a lens that's really more than like a point and shoot or your phone.
Absolutely.
So you can bring your DSLR and a 600 millimeter lens to most of these tracks, and they encourage it.
And I think that's freedom that you spoke about. Sometimes, while that is present in motorsport, it can also come around from the teams. You had spoke about an incident with Red Bull where you'd photograph the rear of the car, and maybe that information wasn't actually something they wanted in the public eye, but it felt very much in the spirit of the sport that you were saying, no, I'm here to take this picture and I'm going to put it out because it's my freedom as that kind of storyteller to tell that full story. And while maybe the teams aren't always a fan of that in terms of their own benefit, that culture more widely in the sport of trying to tell every story and uncover every turn over every stone, should we say. I really enjoy that, and I think that's also something I try and do with my show is get that extensive coverage. And you probably butt heads with some few people along the way, I assume, in your time.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually had an interesting Twitter Spaces that I did recently where one of the Red Bull, he was a former Red Bull like chief engineer on one of the cars. He and I were invited to be on this Twitter Spaces, and we actually had a really entertaining chat because I'm coming at it from the perspective of photographer covering an F1 race, and he's coming at it from, an engineer trying to engineer the car, but also protect the secrets of the car. And, honestly, like my job has very little to do with spy photography, trying to get those aerodynamic pieces of the cars that are secret that other drivers and teams want to know about. I absolutely have been asked to do it, but it's a tiny fraction of what I'm doing on a weekend. And it was really interesting how he was like, well, we hate it that you guys do that. I'm like, well, yeah, but you're also employing people to do that yourself. So
Absolutely,
you can't be too mad about it that I'm taking a picture of the rear of your car. And I only did that to make that particular story you're talking about. I only did that to make a point because we'd been removed from a spot that was really nice, just a nice artistic spot. And they removed us because they assumed that we were all there taking pictures of the diffusers of the cars. And I was like, no, I'm just here doing some pretty photos, but I can go somewhere else to take a picture of the diffuser of your car. So,
Right. Absolutely. And I think that the teams, as much as the teams might resist that in the individual instance, we see, I think, especially with the Formula One season this year, they're perfectly ready to extend that to other teams they're competing against, of trying to block their access to things or cover up their garage when they're working on the car, things like that.
Yeah.
So it's almost, they're doing it to protect their own interests, but what the fans want to see is the real thing behind that.
Yep.
I think one thing I wanted to touch on was, before you made your current career, your time telling stories as a jockey, as a steeplechase racer. How could you ever imagine at that time that you would be where you are now, photographing cars for a living? Did you feel that the rest of your life was going to be in horse racing at the time? What was your mindset back then as to what your future might be?
Yeah, it was kind of a dream. I honestly remember going to a race. Pretty much, it was maybe a couple weeks after I had been given my first DSLR camera for my 21st birthday, and I remember going to a race and looking around at all the professional photographers and just thinking, like, wouldn't it be cool? And I was just at university at the time, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that horse racing I was very passionate about. I was pretty good as a jockey, but I didn't really know where I was going to be able to go with photography. And it wasn't actually until I moved to England for a short spell where I really felt like, I want to give this a try. I want to do something where I can try and tell stories that aren't just horse racing stories. I have my access in horse racing, but I want to be able to use my access there to like build my portfolio and be better. But, I remember a couple times where I was just thinking, like, I don't know how to make this happen, but I need to try and make it happen for myself. And I remember vividly being in that kind of like dream chasing mode, where it wasn't until, I started getting a couple opportunities to go here and there. And I snuck into Croft Circuit up north in Yorkshire, and just convinced the security guy up there that I was there to take pictures for one of the teams that was racing on one weekend. And stuff like that. Like, I just kind of did whatever I could to get into motorsport. And yeah, it was not something I really thought would be a full-time career until much later on. But I knew there was like, I kind of dabbled in it enough to know this is something I really love.
Amazing. And tell me about photographing lawnmower racing. What was that like?
Lawnmower racing is honestly like it is the coolest sport you've ever seen. It's really like very pure motorsports, grassroots, passion for anything that's racing. And in North Carolina, I'm very lucky that it's not just North Carolina and my area, my hometown of Charlotte is known for NASCAR, Haas Formula One teams, based here. They're not really based here, but they have a factory here that produces some of the parts for the car. So it's known for the bigger series, but you can go to almost any small town. You drive, east or west, you can pretty much find a dirt track in every single town. And it's just what the local community does on a Friday or Saturday night, especially during the spring and summer and early fall. It's just what everybody does. It's like, like going to the rodeo out west. And lawnmower racing is kind of almost the most pure version of that. And it's just, dads and brothers and sisters and wives that have taken a lawnmower, stripped it down, taken the mower blades off of it, juiced up the engine quite a bit, put an exhaust on it, and they just throw a motocross helmet and a pair of like ski goggles on, and they just rip around these tiny not even quarter mile racetracks. Like they're really, really, really small. And it's very, very interesting to watch, because there is a governing body to it, but it's basically just a Facebook page with 100 people that kind of participate on it, and there are rules and things. They have to go through like a version of tech scrutineering, but it's really just very entertaining. And to photograph it, that was very early in my career, and I had asked the newspaper that I was interning for. I was like, listen, I think I found something kind of cool that might make a cool story. I want to go see if I can make something out of it. And the newspaper editor was like, yeah, sure, see what you get, go have fun. So I ended up covering a couple weekends worth of lawnmower racing, and it was amazing. It was just a lot of fun. It was very low key. There wasn't a lot of the political red tape you'd get with professional racing series. You can't go here, you can't do this, you can't take pictures of that. You need to have a selected interview time for Lando Norris or Daniel Ricciardo. It was just the drivers just walking around and working on their lawnmowers. And then when they actually go racing, they're running around on 2 or 3 wheels, like just cornering so hard that the thing's nearly ready to flip over. And it was a lot of fun to shoot, and it was something I very much want to go back and redo now that I have more experience and can kind of use the things that I've learned throughout my career to go cover it again. I really want to figure out how to do that.
Awesome. And then so those sort of small scale, more sort of like personal moments that you get in grassroots motorsport, capturing those, is that something that you are able to feel even in a high stakes professional event, maybe like a Monaco or a Macau or something, where there's so much more of that sort of political element and that budget really there, and so many eyes on that event? Do you find in your job now the similar opportunities to capture those sort of small personal moments?
It's much harder. That's why my recommendation for people that want to get into motorsport photography or do what I'm doing is to start at the smallest stuff you can possibly manage to find, because the access is just better. So when you get to a bigger event like Indy 500 or Monaco, or any of the F1 races, any of the big IMSA WeatherTech races, Le Mans, Sebring 12 hours, the World Endurance Championship, all those events, when you multiply the money, and you multiply the sponsorship, and you multiply the fan base, and the time commitments on the drivers, it just makes it much harder to get those moments, to find those details and have access to those moments and those details. You're not going to be able to just walk into the Mercedes garage, into the back of the Mercedes garage, and find Lewis Hamilton snacking on a sandwich, or just chilling, sitting on his phone in the back of the garage. You're never going to be able to do that. And you can do that at the smaller stuff, and you can make something out of those moments. So when those other, it's like it's like my internship. You start at the small stuff, and you figure out what works and what doesn't, and how to do it and how to approach it. And then when you do get to the bigger events, when something does present itself as an opportunity, which is going to be fleeting at best and very rare, but when it does present itself, how to attack it and how to approach it without being a nuisance or in the way. And it's all that experience comes from the smaller stuff.
Brilliant. So starting on that small scale, did you feel quite early on that you were able to develop a style with your photography? Was there a sort of fluency with the equipment that you developed quite quickly and you felt confident of, here's my portfolio with my style in it? Or was it just experiments really, and trial and error?
It was experiments, but it's style is something you just build slowly over time. It's not necessarily something that you get just by doing it once and then you have a style. I still feel like I'm developing my style. I recently went back through some of my images because as part of my work with Lamborghini, we just had last year in August, we had our 100th North America Super Trofeo race, which is the single make series for Lamborghini. And I was asked to go back through my pictures going back to 2013, and I honestly hated going back through my pictures all the way back to the beginning of my professional career, because I very quickly realized that I wasn't very good, and I also didn't shoot enough. So being able to be very self-aware and very hypercritical of yourself is really important to developing that style. Like, it's never good enough. You can ask my wife or my friends. I'm still not happy with my pictures. I still came out of the Daytona 24-hour last weekend not happy with how I had covered it. And I'm sure if you asked my clients or anybody else, they'd say the pictures were brilliant as always. But when I look at it myself, it's just not good enough. So a style is something you're constantly developing, and it just, I don't know that I'll ever have a style that's truly my own, because it's always going to be changing until the day I retire.
How do you with that then, and with that sort of constantly developing fluid style, how do you learn and collaborate with the people around you? You have such a cool job. It feels almost that the people around you, the other photographers that are doing similar things throughout the weekend, do you get a sense of competition with them, or is it a much more mutual collaboration that you feel?
Competition isn't necessarily the right word. It's very healthy. Like, we all push each other to be better, to find something more interesting. It is frustrating when people just straight up copy you. Like, there's pictures that I've seen where I took a photo or a sequence, and then I see somebody else just did the exact same thing on Instagram and posted it like a month later at the same track, the same corner, the same time of day, similar car. There's no originality in that. But between the professional photographers that are out there, I really feel like the healthy competition between all of us really pushes us to evolve our style and evolve what we're doing. Use light differently, use foreground elements differently, shoot slower shutter speeds, do just constantly changing, and it's a lot of fun. I don't feel jealousy toward anyone. I honestly, like, the people that I'm at the track with every weekend, a lot of us are very good friends. We see each other every week or every other week during the year, and you're, away from home. You spend a lot of time with each other. So when I see them posting something or one of their clients post something, I'm like, man, that's a really nice photo. I don't want to go copy it, but I can put my own spin on it to the point where it's mine and not just a straight copy of what they did, like I've seen other people do with some of my work or other people's work.
And are there, when you were first developing photography and becoming, learning how much of a passion it was for you, I suppose, are there any particular photographers that stood out to you in your memory of thinking, oh wow, I've never seen someone do something like that before, or I wish that's a sort of an aspiration to reach that level of quality? Any examples of that?
Yeah, so like when I was first starting, I would look at issues of F1 Racing magazine, which is a Haymarket publication. And in each magazine, they had a kind of a double page feature about, a picture from a recent race with all the camera settings in it. And I would look at these pictures from Mark Thompson, Darren Heath, Vladimir Reese, James Moy, Laurent Charniot. There's so many photographers that are covering Formula One, which was the sport that I was mainly following at the time. And to see the work that they had created made me, it honestly made me fall in love with photography of car racing, because it's not just photography, it's how you tell the stories of car racing and how you can tell those stories using shutter speed and color and light, portraiture, candid portraiture. It's not just like, guy on a white background, kind of a boring portrait. Like, you want to capture them in their environment that's not even necessarily in the race car. And so when I was looking at these pictures, that's what really made me say to myself, like, wow, it's not just a car on a racetrack. There's more to it than that. And looking at their pictures that they created, and some of them, a lot of them are very good friends of mine now. These photographers that I looked up to when I was younger and starting my career, those photographers really helped me fall in love with the sport, not just photography, but the sport itself. And then when I figured out how I could kind of merge the two myself, it's been very humbling to have people kind of feel the same way about me toward photography and the sport of motorsport, not just Formula One, not just IMSA WeatherTech or sports car racing, but motorsport, that they can see that it's a beautiful thing, which is exactly how I felt when I was looking at their pictures.
And how do you feel that the use of social media and sort of your Twitter and your Instagram enables you to, like you said, for people to view you now as that guy who is having that dream job and creating really beautiful artwork? How do you feel that your sort of more direct engagement with fans of your work has enabled you to kind of build and grow that relationship?
I mean, social media has been, for photographers in general, it's been the best thing ever. You don't have to have a website and a portfolio now. I mean, obviously, it still helps to have something that's yours and yours alone. But Instagram is the new portfolio, and being able to share those images is also, hugely beneficial, because it just gives you so much more reach. Like, to say to somebody, even 20 or 30 years ago, that you can put a picture on the internet and it'll be on your own page that then get seen by hundreds of thousands of people every year, is something I don't think they could probably believe that would be the case. And it's been a huge benefit for all of us in the arts community, but it also has its own downsides too, where it really, um, I don't want to say like puts pressure on you, but it does put pressure on you to constantly keep innovating, constantly keep putting out something new. And it's not just, you can't just let it sit for a month or two and then, let it be somebody else's problem, like it was in the magazine days, where you submit your work, it goes in the magazine, you don't necessarily choose what pictures go in the magazine. Now it's like you have to put your own pictures up, and you better make sure that it's the best of the best that you can produce. And there is a pressure to that I I struggle with. I think everybody struggles with. If you have a public facing social media presence, it's not always easy, but it does allow you to share your own work that you choose to share without having to have somebody else be the middleman.
And is that quite important to you, to be able to, obviously you're fully engaging in your own creative process when you go and work at a race weekend, but also to have that editorial control of, these are my favorite photos and I get to tell you what my favorite photos are. It's not a brand saying, oh, we can, see the Lamborghini logo perfectly here. That's
Right.
our shot. Is it having that process of no, I'm telling my own story with pictures that I like the best, I'm most proud of? Is that what
Yeah,
really, that's the benefit of it?
totally. And a lot of the pictures that I put on my Instagram aren't necessarily pictures that I took for a client. And it doesn't get tricky, but it can kind of like leave a conflicted feeling where last night I put up a picture of a Porsche that I took on the Daytona banking, and there's Christmas lights that I shot through. And it was pretty late at night, but the car is not a client. Porsche is not a client. It just, in no way, shape, or form is it a client. I'm semi okay friends with one of the drivers of it, but other than that, it has no relevance to anything that I'm being paid for. But it was the best of the pictures that I got from that spot. And you kind of feel a little bit conflicted about that, but at the same time, it is my portfolio. It is what I choose to share. That's the best of my work from a race or a weekend. And I don't need anybody's permission. Or like you said, the Lamborghini logo is perfectly sharp on the pole winning car from XYZ race. It can be whatever I want to share from whatever race I want it to be.
And what are some of the patterns you've noticed in being able to directly engage with fans on Instagram and stuff? Are there maybe things that will get more engagement and attention on Instagram that maybe you haven't, that surprised you? You thought, oh, wow, people really like that. Maybe I should do that more. Are there any examples of that that stand out?
Yes, but not in necessarily a good way. Like some of the most boring pictures I've ever taken, it's just a picture of a car on a racetrack. It took nothing special to do. It took almost no skill to make it. It's just kind of sitting in the right place at the right time. Those pictures do really well, and people think, say that you're the best thing since sliced bread with a camera. And, internally, I'm thinking to myself, I don't really even like this picture. I just kind of like the car, where the moment was, the car was the one that won the race, but it's not even the most special picture I have of the car. I just, for whatever reason at the moment, that was like, I'm just going to post this one. And it goes super viral. Same with stuff on TikTok. You're like, I don't even understand why this went super viral, because I'm not even that proud of it. But then the stuff that you are really proud of, that took all the skills that I have in my toolbox, everything I've ever learned to that point, it took to make that picture. And then, people are like, nah, it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really frustrating. You're like, you don't understand how hard this was to do this. Like, and nobody there, it just kind of falls flat. So it can be frustrating.
Absolutely. And do you think that covering so many different categories of motorsport, whether it be from lawnmowers to bikes flying around Macau to the Monaco Grand Prix, having that sort of such a diverse experience in all those different motorsport categories, does that inform you to know what to look for in every race? You're not only thinking about the category you're at that weekend, but you're taking a bit of knowledge from this race and a bit of knowledge from this race. How do you, is that just a subconscious sort of automatic thing where you feel like you know what's good, or are you remembering direct lessons?
It's subconscious, but there's also a huge element where um, covering an entire season of something and nothing else, it does lead you to like creative ruts where you're only seeing the same people, the same cars, similar tracks. I feel if I was only doing one category, it would be very easy to fall into just taking the same pictures every weekend. And I know people that have that problem because they cover NASCAR, which is 36 weekends a year. They cover IndyCar, which is 18 weekends a year, or something like that. Formula One, which will be 23 weekends a year. It's hard to get a different shot of Lewis Hamilton or Sebastian Vettel every single weekend, because F1 purposely makes the paddocks and the tracks and the media pens look very similar to each other. So you have to try really hard to get something different. And when you come at a series, like I cover a handful of F1 races a year, a handful of IndyCar races, a handful of World Endurance Championship races, and most of the IMSA WeatherTech season. And when I can come at one of those series that I don't spend a ton of time in, you can come at it more creatively, and you can see, yourself trying to do something different than the other people are doing, just because you don't know any better. You just see something differently, because I don't do it every weekend. I see a lot of the really boring pictures that I take of, like, there was one particular picture I took in Austin last year, where the Ferrari logo outside their hospitality was lit up in the morning sun, and it was just like perfectly lit on the prancing horse, nothing else. It was just a really nice shot of the Ferrari logo. And I know most of my colleagues probably would have walked past that picture because they've gotten it, 100 times that year. Like, they might all do it at the first race of the year, but then after that, you're like, all right, I've got this picture. I don't need to do it again. I don't need to do the same pictures week in and week out. And I come in and take a fairly boring picture, and I've seen it used even as recently as yesterday, a picture that I took in October. So, having that ability to come at something with fresh eyes is really beneficial. And I love the variety of motorsports that I get to cover, that it's not just one category. Being able to do a little bit of NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, World Endurance Championship, WeatherTech, Macau when it presents itself, just random stuff. Just is variety is the spice of life, is really how I look at motorsport. It's all good.
Absolutely. So, in terms of specifically then the upcoming Daytona 500, that being a new event for you, how do you see that? What everything you just spoke about is, going to be applied directly soon coming up. So, is that something you've actively thought about? Maybe you're not going to go where every other photographer is, or you're going to try and apply your skill set in a new way, in a new environment. How are you approaching that directly?
Yeah, I'm really, really, really excited to cover my first Daytona 500. I've been to Daytona so many times, I don't even know how many times, but I've never been for a NASCAR event there, and it's very different than what we're allowed to do for like the Daytona 24 hour. Yes, they use the same, like most of the same oval, like they complete all the 100 yards of the oval essentially for the 24 hour. But then when you put 40 stock cars going around the oval, it's very different. And there's only, technically 4 corners is how NASCAR categorizes their turns. So your options are much more limited, but I can also take what I've used and learned from covering the Daytona 24 hour and certain times of year and sunlight, shutter speeds, panning, just coming at it with fresh eyes, and also not knowing the personalities as well helps a lot too. Like I don't know, I mean obviously I'm enough of a fan to know who the bigger names are, but it's a lot of fun to go to an event and not know, you know, who is the best car, who is the best driver. Like they're all kind of the same to me. And I know more about NASCAR than I do about, other sports. Like if I went to a British touring car championship race, I would cover it like everybody is the same level of importance, even though I know some person might win probably more likely than the others. But it's a lot of fun to go into something with completely fresh eyes and have fun with it. I haven't really talked to my employer about a photography brief, but what we've talked about in the past is that I'll just be given free reign to go cover the event as I see the event, which is really what he wants, because I'm like the third guy on a team, and I can just kind of go and have fun and add to their client portfolio for the weekend with stuff that's just for fun. And that's really where it just makes it just really enjoyable to go to a race and just have fun with it.
I think that's really brilliant as well for new fans that are entering that environment, where I feel like, especially personally for me, trying to cover a bunch of different motorsport categories, it can be very intimidating when you're approaching a series that you don't know a lot about, but you're looking at it and like, well, all these people, they know a lot about it. So you want to be careful not to get something wrong or to not have something in proper context. And I feel like a lot of people did that with Abu Dhabi, maybe people that didn't follow the whole Formula One season, but more just my own note in that. But what I mean is to be able to share in taking that new experience and that connection with someone who might be looking at you as a photographer who's going there for the first time, and then someone who's watching it for the first time. You get to share in that learning, which I think is really cool. Do you think that that sense of novelty fades a little bit? You spoke in an article, or wrote in an article that you'd written for WTF1 about the Triple Crown of motorsport, and you said you've become jaded with certain events throughout the years, working, seeing maybe things that not everyone sees, can sort of dull down that fire a little bit, that passion for racing. Is that a more thing that's something that's a specific examples that stand out that cause that, or that jadedness happens over time, do you think?
I think it just happens over time. If you spend enough time around anything, you just become used to it. Like it takes a lot for me to really, see a supercar driving down the street and go, wow. Uh, I I still get that, but it takes a lot more for me to get there. Whereas, if a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or a Porsche 911, drives down the street and, some, kid that doesn't get to see these cars as regularly as I do, they have a very different perspective and sense of of awe to it. Whereas, I'm at a racetrack and they have an entire Porsche corral or a Ferrari corral or a Lamborghini corral where you can go at the racetrack and you drive by, a parking lot with 40 Lamborghinis in it, 40 Ferraris, 40 Porsches, and you think to yourself like, it's just the Ferrari parking lot. I don't need to I don't really even have time or need to go wander around it, because I've got something better to do, or the race cars are more interesting to me. It takes a lot for me to really, just because of how long I've been doing this, it takes a lot for me to feel that sense of awe, and I still get it regularly. It just takes more for me to get there. And I hate that it happens, but it's like a good example with Formula One. This will be my 10th year covering Formula One. And at this point, like when the Haas car comes around, I know they're not in contention for a win. I know they're barely, if at all, in contention for points. And it's frustrating because the Haas car will come by me and the light will be absolutely stunning. It'll be amazing. It'll be everything I've ever wished for. And I'm thinking to myself, I wish it was Lewis Hamilton on track right now, or I wish it was Max Verstappen. You instead of seeing the picture as a picture, you wish that it was a picture of somebody else, because I know that it's not important that it's a Haas and that car is going to finish 19th or 20th in the race. And that no one's going to care. If I had gotten the same picture of Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen or Sebastian Vettel or whoever it is, just the engagement on social media, or just the impressiveness of the picture is just multiplied just because of who it is. And that's frustrating that I'm aware of that. So it's nice, like I said, when I go to an event like a NASCAR race or a Macau Grand Prix where I don't know anybody, like any of these kids in the F3 race in Macau could become a future Formula One champion. If they've got the money and they've got the talent, they can become a Formula One champion. But I treat, they're 14, 15, 16 years old. They're all the same to me. So you can shoot it all with the same lack of knowledge, and all the pictures are just as important as the next.
And is there something special about those sort of legendary street tracks, that environment it puts you in, where you're in the middle of a kind of bustling, amazing city that people probably already would go and take photos of Monaco, just the bay and the harbour? And you have this amazing event going on inside of that, and so many stories on the racetrack with that incredible backdrop. Do the city races stand out as particularly exciting to photograph, or is it just a different challenge?
It's a different challenge, but there is something to be said about the proximity that you get to race cars. There's like an adrenaline rush to it. It's really something that I kind of longed for when I was riding race horses. That was the adrenaline fix that I really had a hard time replacing that when I retired from riding horses. I still haven't found anything that quite gets you that buzz that I had, but the closest I've come is covering street circuits like Long Beach, like Macau, like Monaco. When you have a race car that weighs a couple thousand pounds and it's coming at you at 115, 120 miles an hour, and you can feel, the car kind of kick the wall as it comes out of a corner, or it's literally, a few centimeters, inches away from you and your camera. There's absolutely something really special about that, not just for us, but for the drivers as well, because there's just no room for error. You go to a place like Circuit of the Americas or Shanghai or Malaysia, or, one of the bigger F1 tracks that are just physically big, not just like it's a big event, big venue. It's just a physically big place to work. When you compare that to the adrenaline you get from a car that's next to you while it's racing, is really, really cool. It's a lot of fun.
And you had mentioned one thing that stood out to me when I was researching for this was that Silverstone, not that interesting of a place to shoot, not that exciting, but a bit boring, a bit flat, just an airfield, nothing going on. Silverstone, huh?
Yeah, there's a couple tracks like that. Even Sebring, which is also another airfield. It's a former World War II bomber base in Florida that they run the 12 Hours of Sebring, and both of those tracks, and it's something to be said for how special it is when you add 150,000 spectators and the color and the energy that fans bring to an event. Sebring is one of the most boring places you can ever shoot without fans there. I imagine Silverstone would be probably even worse because of, sometimes the very gray English weather.
Absolutely.
But when you add when you add 150,000 fans that are all there, like no one's there because they have to be there. Like no one's there because they're being made to be there. Everybody's there because they want to be there, and they want to be part of that action, and they want to be part of that atmosphere. It changes a circuit like so drastically. Some circuits can, if you took all the fans away, some circuits would still be just as cool as they are with 150,000 fans. But other places like Silverstone and Sebring, those two particularly just come to mind because they don't have that much interesting about them as a circuit. But then you put all the fans in the background, and Sebring is cool because they build all these scaffolding towers for fans to watch from, and they come in the week before and basically build like 3 meter tall scaffolding towers and somehow get a leather couch to the top of it where it's 15 feet above the ground. And you're thinking to yourself, how did you get a leather couch 15 feet above the ground without a crane? And it's on this wobbly, like painting scaffolding tower, and they've strung Christmas lights, and then you throw the racing action in there. It becomes a totally different event. And Silverstone would be very much the same when you have, Lewis Hamilton flags and McLaren jerseys, and everybody just wanting to be part of the energy. It just changes the atmosphere of a pretty boring circuit pretty immensely.
And I'd love to touch on just as you had mentioned there, the idea of people being fans in the UK. It just seems tied to the history of Formula One. But as someone who's lived in America and England, do you feel a resurging passion for Formula One over the last couple of years in America? It seems to me, just objectively, the viewer numbers have gone up. More people are kind of buying merch and engaging on social media. But is there a passion that you can sense in the people you talk to? Austin
was when I went for the Formula One race this past October, it was like nothing I'd ever felt in all the F1 races I've ever been to. I think it was probably one of the highest attended F1 races ever, maybe, definitely in the United States. And that isn't just something that, came out of nowhere. It's been a slow burn, but I think the Netflix series has helped immensely, putting it in front of people that don't honestly have any idea about Formula One or car racing. But to see that it's growing so fast is really good for the sport, but also really good for America. More than likely we'll probably have at least 2 or 3 Grand Prix in America in the next 3 to 5 years. We obviously will have Miami and Austin in this coming year's championship, and it's probably deservedly like there. I mean, when you kind of boil it down, Europe is more or less the same size as America, and I think Europe has like 11 or 12 Grand Prix, and yes, they're each in different countries, but in the same landmass size. And there's going to be people that say, well, America is only one country, but you could realistically cut America up into 4 or 5 different countries with 4 or 5 unique cultures, and they would still stand on its own. So to have that energy and that passion for Formula One, not just coming back, but I feel like it's a younger crowd, it's a more diverse crowd, age-wise as well as ethnic backgrounds, which is really cool to see. Just walking around the Austin fan areas, I saw people that traditionally would not have been at a Formula One race. Just for whatever reason, it's always been a rich old white man's club kind of thing, to be perfectly honest. And now you see like so many women, enjoying it, and just like the Latin fans, the Mexican fans that are there cheering for Checo. It was so cool to see, and it made me really proud to be an American Formula One fan for as long as I've been, because I've been trying to sing the gospel of Formula One to anybody that'll listen for as long as I can remember, going back to when I was 12 years old. But it was hard to get people's interest in it because they didn't know how to watch it, and now they see it on Netflix, they can understand it. People that I have never had any interest in car racing come up to me and they're like, oh my gosh, did you see the latest season of Formula One on Netflix? And did you go to this race? Like, were you there when that happened? And it's really cool to see that. It's really cool to have that energy. And you're a part of that story as well with the role that you play now. I think people really benefit from the creativity and the insight that
you're able to capture. Do you think there's, I suppose, my question is, what is it about a still image that is most powerful to you in telling a story that enables you to say what you want to say about a race in a still frame?
Well, it's something I've said recently, but I've always believed in it. And the saying that I've kind of made up is, did a race even happen if there's no photographs of it? Like, because social media is such a powerful part of not just our world, but a sport's personality now, and a team's personality, their presence. If they don't have pictures to share of their weekend or from Formula One, if you go to F1's Instagram page, like, and you start scrolling, yes, there's videos, but it's like 80% photos to 20% videos. And it would be the same on any team or any driver. If you don't have those pictures to share, you don't have those moments in a still photograph, and it's just broadcast footage. It's not that interesting if you're just sharing broadcast footage. Okay, yeah, it reached 100 million people in the broadcast, but I think if you cumulatively combined all of the engagement that you get from the photographers on a weekend, it far, far, far exceeds that 100 million views and engagement. So it is photographers do play a really important part of the social media and the storytelling of a race or an event or a series. But I think it's easily forgotten when people are like, oh, it's just a picture. Like, it's not just a picture. Somebody had to walk to that corner or set up to wait for Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen to walk into that beam of light, and that you like just screen grab it off of Twitter or Instagram and make it your wallpaper on your computer or your iPhone. And they're like, oh, best picture of Lewis Hamilton ever. I love you, Lewis. It's like, well, somebody made that picture. Lewis didn't take it himself. I promise you that. I don't even know that he's ever held a camera. And secondly, it was created by somebody that had to purposely think about it for you to then go and then, praise Lewis Hamilton, but somebody else is the creative genius behind that picture of Lewis.
And was that passion for the power of still imagery and the craft of photography, was that what drove you to collaborate with Drew Gibson in your workshop series and share that information, that spirit of opening up the industry? Could you speak a little bit about that?
Partially. Drew and I started our workshop series, Paddock Focus, just because we both get so many questions from fans, from other photographers, from people that are interested in our industry. We get bombarded in a good way with how do you do what you do? How did you get to where you are? How do I find clients? How do I get credentials to races? And it's never really been a secret. It's just been something that not everybody talked about, I guess, for one reason or another. And we wanted to be able to and honestly, like, selfishly monetize how many of these types of questions we get, because we can give our insight, we can give our experience to those people that are really truly interested in wanting to learn it, because anybody can go to a race and enjoy the experience of photographing a race. You don't need credentials to do that. So we want to be able to share our experience that we've learned through our careers, which is cumulatively between the two of us, probably like 25 or 30 years of photography and covering racing between the two of us, to be able to share, what we love about the sport, but also the things we've learned the hard way. And, because when we both started, there wasn't such a thing as social media. When I first started, it was really the very, 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 very infancy of social media. And he predates that. So he was all the way back into like just magazines and newspapers and teamwork. And now it's a lot of our work is just being pushed to social media. So being able to help people understand how the industry works, answer those questions that people weren't answering previously has been really rewarding for both of us.
That's really interesting that your kind of your openness to share that, I think, is really gonna help that next generation of guys that are maybe picking up a camera for their first time just now, or they're young Formula One fans, and that to reinstate that passion for still imagery as a means beyond the broadcast, beyond the Netflix show of telling the story of a race weekend. I think it's really powerful that that spirit is there, not only the drivers are always talking about fostering young race drivers and getting more people into the sport that way. But the attitude of getting more people into that journalism side of it, I think, is really powerful and a great project. Would highly recommend anyone to check that out if you're looking for more detail on some of Jamey's insight there. Really brilliant stuff.
Well, thanks.
Appreciate
it.
Absolutely. I think one last thing I wanted to touch on was Le Mans, 24-hour race, the most legendary race in the world. Something that you have spoke about as being the standout single event that drives your passion, that none of that sort of jadedness that you'd spoken about earlier. It's Le Mans is still the one. What's a Le Mans weekend like from your eyes?
It is brutal. I've honestly never worked a Le Mans without having a top tier team as a client, which is a great problem to have. It's not at all me complaining about that. It is absolutely exhausting though. Since 2016, I've worked with Toyota, so on all of their LMP1 project since 2016, and then now moving into the hypercar era. I've missed the last two, so I missed 2020 and I missed 2021 Le Mans, but with Toyota, they have this very deep sense of all for one and one for all. And it's the company, obviously being Japanese, is very, very team oriented, more so than any other teams that I've worked with, from Formula One to sports cars to whatever else. Like Toyota just has this atmosphere where everybody in the team matters. And that's great, but it also means we're all leaving at the hotel at the same time, even if you have nothing to do. The mechanics are having to be at the track at 7:30 or 8 in the morning, which means all the marketing team is also needing to be there at 7:30 or 8 in the morning. So it makes for probably, we normally start real work on Tuesday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are all like 17 to 18, maybe 19-hour days. And then on Saturday and Sunday, you throw a 40-hour day. It is exhausting. And the shot list that we have to kind of check through and make sure that we get all these things for Toyota for their social media use is really extensive. But you also know that there's kind of an internal sense of pride that you're not just taking pictures that no one will see. Like, you're taking pictures that hundreds of thousands, millions of people will see. They're the team that's going to be in contention for a win. So to be able to work around the drivers and the mechanics, especially when Fernando Alonso was in the car, Sebastian Buemi, Mike Conway, Kamui Kobayashi, like they've all become pretty good friends of mine just because of the time you spend around each other at Le Mans. And then you get to see those cars on this iconic racetrack that is almost a century old. I mean, I think this is their 93rd year, I guess. So we're pushing toward 100 years of Le Mans, and that is really, really cool and really special. You go out on the Mulsanne at sunset or in the middle of the night, and I still get goosebumps. That's definitely one of those places that I'm not jaded by at all. You still absolutely, when you hear those cars, you can hear them from miles off. You hear those cars coming towards you. It is really, really special.
And when you're working in that environment, how do you tell yourself you're finished? I mean, obviously it's at the end of the race, but how do you feel? You spoke earlier about not feeling satisfied, not feeling like you'd covered the Daytona 24-hour well enough. Is there anything that enables you to feel complete in your work when you're working at such a schedule that is foreign to most people that work a job? How do you get a sense of fulfillment?
There isn't really a guaranteed way to know that you've done the best you could. You really just have to take each hour as its own separate race, almost. Like each hour of the 24, you kind of treat it separately. So you start with morning warm up in the morning, and then you go into the pre-grid, and then the grid itself, and then you go into the race start. And each little section of the race, you kind of take it as its own separate event, and you try and do the best you can out of it. Planning helps a lot. So knowing when I'm going to go back to the media center and edit, if we've got weather that is moving through the area, having to plan where you're going to be when it starts raining, or when if the sun is out, you need to plan where you're going to be for sunset or sunrise. There's just a lot to it, and the best way to really kind of prepare yourself is to have a little bit of a plan. And obviously plans can get thrown out the window, and you can kind of call an audible and change it, but you still have to have in your mind like what your goal is, where you want to be at a certain time of day, and then you work around that. But it is really hard, and especially as you get toward the end of the race, there's not a guarantee that you're going to love every hour of the race. So you really have to be aware that it's not all going to be home runs. It's not all going to be portfolio winning images. You kind of have to check the boxes that your client wants you to check, for their purposes. And when you get to the end of it, you can only hope that the team has done well, which they haven't always when I've been there. The team does well, but also that you have enough energy to keep, going all the way through the podium and then into the editing part of the day where you're finishing the final batch of images that you need to edit. That you have the energy and the mental capacity to stare at your computer and take what you took on track and did the best you could with your camera, and then polish it, not even heavily, just a little bit of a polish on the editing platform, and then send it to Toyota for the world to see. So there's a lot of pressure to it.
So you touched on there, your approach to editing is very small scale. It's, you're shooting raw, so you have that ability to mess with the lighting and the color profiles in amazing detail now with the level of software that people have. Do you feel that that's kind of the attitude you've evolved towards editing, is just little changes?
Yeah, that came from a lot of my time spent in newspaper editing, in newspaper photography, where there's editorial guidelines. You can't change that much for a picture in a newspaper. You don't want to. It's ethically not possible. You can't add or take away subjects from an image. You can't manipulate an image to lead the viewer into something that didn't happen. And I've tried to take that, and a lot of us, especially the older photographers that have been around a long time, have tried to take that mindset to, if you don't like a background or you don't like a situation, then move. So I truly don't have time to spend even 1 minute editing a picture. If it's not something that I can edit in, 15 or 20 seconds max, I'm going to trash it. Like, there's just no point in me adding in a rainbow or a sun flare or a unicorn galloping across the racetrack. Like, it has to be what I want it to be in the camera. Otherwise, it's too much work. It's too much time. I might be missing something out on track. There's a lot to it that you really have to be thinking about when you're actually physically holding the camera trackside, that I need it to be as good as possible right then and there.
That's a really, really brilliant insight there. Thank you for that. And I think just touch on one final question. In the upcoming year for you, beyond the Daytona 500, what stands out at the moment in your calendar as something that's going to capture that passion that you spoke about with Le Mans, that drive to create your best artwork? What events are upcoming for you?
I'll be at the Miami Grand Prix for the first time, which, it'll be a first for all of us. It'll be a big event for Formula One. It'll be a big event for Miami. I'm really excited about that. That should be, probably a highlight for the year. I'm thinking that I'll hopefully be back in Macau in the end of the year. Hopefully that China will lift a lot of its restrictions, but we'll see how it comes together a little bit closer to that. But honestly, like the Daytona 500, I'm very excited about. We have Super Sebring, which is a combined World Endurance Championship and IMSA WeatherTech event. So we have the 8-hour World Endurance Championship race on Friday, and then we have the 12-hour IMSA WeatherTech race on Saturday at Sebring in March. I've got Formula One testing in Barcelona between the 500 and Sebring. So I'll be kind of a little bit of everywhere, starting to get back to a lot of the more international travel that I've been doing the last several years until coronavirus really shut everything down.
Absolutely. And that's the Barcelona testing that is not going to be publicly broadcast. So that's going to be a really interesting task to capture that in the upcoming Formula One season we have. I'm sure you're more aware than anyone as a fan and someone that works inside of it. Those attention on those cars is going to be very high stakes stuff, I think.
Yeah, and it won't, like, I think people are really upset that it's not going to be televised, but it wasn't televised until 2 or 3 years ago. So it really
Yeah.
won't be that different than it was up until, I mean, the last test I did was 2017, I think. And more recently, I haven't been able to go to the testing. So it wasn't that long ago that it was pretty much as it's going to be here. You'll still have a full gamut of journalists covering it, the full gamut of photographers covering it. So it's still going to be really important for pictures and content from the teams and editorial outlets. But to be honest, like being standing there trackside and watching, Williams or a Haas just do laps for 8 hours isn't that exciting. You get like brief stints of Lewis Hamilton doing 5 or 6 laps, and then Max Verstappen doing 5 or 6 laps. But in general, F1 testing is not very exciting. It's great for photography, but it's not very exciting viewing.
Sure. And so lastly, just as a fan, could I have one prediction for the upcoming Formula One season? What do you think is going to be upcoming? We had Jonathan Wheatley a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, and he spoke about how he sees a resurging Ferrari power unit coming up, their driver pairing coming together, and that team looking strong, being clearly thirdly best. What do you think is upcoming from your perspective?
Even looking backwards a little bit, I think we're really fortunate, speaking as an F1 fan, because yes, I work in the industry. Yes, I work in motorsport. Yes, I cover Formula One, but I'm still at the heart of all that I am just a Formula One fan with a camera. And I think we're all hugely fortunate to have an incredible championship that we were able to watch last year, because as a fan that has been around for a long time, I've seen some really horrifically boring championships. So when you have a championship that goes down to the last lap of the last race, even though it's slightly controversial at the end, seeing Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen banging wheels is a great thing for the sport. It's a great thing for us as fans. So honestly, like if Mercedes doesn't screw it up, I don't see how Lewis doesn't win this championship, because he's going to come back swinging from what happened in Abu Dhabi, but just generally like feeling motivated, feeling refreshed. I think he'll be a completely, he's going to come out just ready to take on anyone and everything. But I think, you have that, but you also have Max Verstappen, who's maturing and growing and learning how to fight a championship, and being a world champion now. I think the two of them together are just going to create epic battles. I think that's what we all want. We don't want somebody to just blow the competition out of the water. That's not very exciting. You want them to earn it. You want them to win it in ways that are just not boring for everybody to watch. And then you throw in, kind of the X factor, the question marks, like Ferrari, Alpine could be strong. Like we don't know. Maybe Haas will come out of the gate and have, like a Braun type car where they've done something that nobody else was thinking of, and they are suddenly like on the podium. I mean, it's unlikely, but it's entirely possible when you have rule changes this big, just like we had from 2008 to 2009. And that's really exciting for me, that we have all these question marks now, that it'll be great racing. You have remotivated Lewis, you have a really motivated Verstappen, great championship battles, new tracks, a long season, unfortunately. But I think I'm really excited. I think it's a good thing for all of us. So the message to all the toxic people out there that just want one or the other, just be thankful that you've got great racing to watch.
Absolutely. That's a brilliant message there for everyone, whatever fan allegiance you may have, especially after Abu Dhabi. It felt, it was an amazing season, but I think it was also a tough time to be. I think you can speak as well, someone who is so actively engaged in the social media side of F1. It was tough to be proud of the sport in that moment. I thought it was like, come on, what are we doing here, guys? Let's really, it's at its core, it's still kind of a show, and we need to have a little bit more of that respect. So if that's something that can come back into the sport in 2022, I think that will be really amazing. And I also wanted to touch on the wild card of George Russell. I think to me, he's that big wild card of, well, he's not going to be like Valtteri Bottas. I mean, we saw when he subbed when Lewis Hamilton had COVID in 2020 season, he had no plan to be a second driver that weekend, and now he has a full season with a new car. How's he going to get his nose in? If he underperforms, how's that going to be taken by the British media? You know, that's really the wild card for me, and something I'm excited to cover.
He's definitely not going to roll over, and Red Bull touched on it too as well, but saying that the better that George Russell does, the better it will be for Verstappen's championships, championship chances. And for anyone that doesn't understand that, like, you have to understand, you don't want two drivers fighting for the championship. You have to have a number one and a number two, and the more closely or evenly matched they are, they just take points away from each other. So, you know, whether Checo can up his game and basically be the same kind of contention for Verstappen would be the only way that you get, you know, a more even playing field across 4 drivers or even 6 drivers if you then have Ferrari in there.
Absolutely.
So it's gonna be fascinating to have George Russell, who's now very experienced in a slow car. I think he's probably learned a lot from that. Lewis has never had that kind of opportunity to be at the back of the field. So it's going to be very interesting.
Brilliant. Well, I look forward to covering it here on the show and seeing some of the amazing artwork that you're going to be able to capture throughout the forthcoming year. So I think we can wrap up the episode there. This has been a real treat for me. It's a brilliant insight, and I hope everyone enjoyed listening to it. I'll let Jamey take over now to promote anything he would like to promote. But thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Jack. I really appreciate it. You can see a lot of my pictures on any social media platform you wish, all at Jamey Price Photo.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for listening. And that's the end of this week's interview segment.